Puts me so much trouble, it's not my fault. All this, I also lose my friends, I lost my baby. That is looking crack, only today want to change. He wanted us, so the cougar try more like to feel. I'd skill the real, take your life in a second. The table drinks coffee in my kitchen, I mentioned. Eating every song, I just wanted to go away. You decide to stay in the well. I want to be forgiven, I don't like this kid for money. Sorry I was scared, you're not the way it feels. Like to sleep waiting for someone to come in and kill you. The final thing is that now I'm not afraid of anything. Cause they gonna kill anyone that feels so powerful. They try by you every new skin of everything is confusing. You will be good, but you will be more. You will be good, but you will be more. You will be good, but you will be more. Alone every day, it is a praise of pleasure.
Good morning and welcome to Dynasty 365, where the film will set you free. Today we're going to change up the episode format a little bit. First we're going to be going through the news and notes around the NFL. Then we're going to look at Ridley's situation on the Chicago Bears. Then we'll examine Ridley as a prospect, and I'll give you my verdict on where he should be taken in Dynasty rookie drafts. So today, Patrick Peterson, cornerback for the Cardinals, was suspended 6 games for performing-enhancing drugs. He's a huge piece of the Cardinals' defense and is best used as a shadow corner. It's not good for the 4th-ranked pass defense in the NFL last season because they were pretty much only 4th-ranked because they couldn't stop the run. They were dead last in rushing yards per game already and 20th in total yards given up per game. This is definitely good news if you've got a receiver on the Lions, Ravens, Panthers, Seahawks, Bengals, or Falcons, as Patrick Peterson is going to be missing those first games of the year. There is also more speculation today that Kyle Rudolph is going to get traded, the tight end for the Vikings. I would be very surprised if they do cut him or trade him. They're definitely not going to cut him because Irv isn't ready in the receiving game as it stands right now. And last year, Rudolph did develop into a reliable, contested catcher. It would weaken the run game and the passing game for the Vikings just to save $7.6 million that isn't currently needed to my knowledge. I think this is more narrative driven by hopeful Irv Smith owners than anything else. The Broncos' best cornerback, Chris Harris, reportedly traded offers with the Broncos management. It definitely seems like he's looking for a big payday, which is unlikely for a 29-year-old former undrafted free agent. And it's also backed up by the fact that no team was going to trade for him because of the contract that he was demanding after the trade took place. If the Broncos did lose him, it would be a huge downgrade in our secondary, and I do hope a deal is reached soon. To me, the signs still point to him remaining a Bronco, but it's definitely something that I'd rather see happen sooner than later. Staying in the AFC West, Darren Lee of the Jets, a middle linebacker, was traded to the Kansas City Chiefs, who are switching to a 4-3 scheme from a 3-4. He was only traded for a 6th-round pick, which might surprise some, but Lee has been very underwhelming at finding the football and tackling so far in his NFL career, but he does have speed and he can cover route runners. His value in IDP leagues definitely goes up because of this news, but he's most likely going to remain just as inconsistent week to week as he has been so far throughout his career. He's good linebacker depth in IDP leagues, but he's more of a break glass in case of emergency type player instead of the IDP tackle monster that you're probably looking for. Middle linebacker Jamie Collins, formerly of the Browns, did sign with the Pats. They have underwhelming linebackers already there with Kyle Van Noy, Dante Hightower, but they did have second-year player Juwan Bentley show some promise last year and cover skills until his season-ending ACL tear. Collins is probably in a similar tier to Darren Lee based off of this news, but I definitely have Lee higher because he's faster, and there's still the possibility that he does develop and that a scheme change actually improves his game. In the AFC East, there's already been a power grab by Adam Gase to get the general manager of the Jets fired, and he's the interim GM until they do find a replacement. Gase is the one that traded away Darren Lee and signed Robbie Anderson to a 1-year, $3.11 million extension. Based off of my experience, it's not a good sign when a first-year coach has enough leverage to oust a sitting general manager, and giving that much say-so to a first-year coach has a pretty spotty track record in the NFL. As always, only time will tell, but that gives me a bad gut feeling. On to Ridley's situation. At receiver, the Bears already have Allen Robinson, who's 26, a contested catch specialist that only has one really good season in fantasy due to a perfect garbage time situation year down in Jacksonville. Robinson played 13 games in 2018 with 94 targets, or 7.2 per game, 55 catches, 754 yards, and 4 touchdowns. If he would have stayed healthy for 16, A-Rob would have got 116 targets, 68 catches, 928 yards, 5 touchdowns with a 59% catch rate. Last year, A-Rob had 14 yards per route, 8 yards per target, 14 yards per touch. He missed 2 games with a groin injury and 1 game with a rib bruise. He does have a foot fracture and an ACL tear in his medical history. I expect him to be utilized very similarly to how he was in 2018 going forward. The second leading target getter on the Bears was Taylor Gabriel, who's 28. He's a quickness and speed receiver without much size at 170 pounds. He played 16 games with 93 targets for 5.8 a game on average, 67 catches, 688 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He averaged 10 yards per route, 7 yards per target, 10 yards per touch, with a 72% catch rate. He plays a different role than Ridley and should be used similarly, but when his speed and quickness does leave him in a few years, he'll probably fall off a cliff production-wise. Anthony Miller is 25 and is a second-year player that was a second-round pick of the Bears just last year. He's an all-around receiver with good athleticism and high football IQ. He played 15 games, starting 4, receiving 54 targets, which is 3.6 per game, 33 catches, 423 yards, and 7 touchdowns. He averaged 13 yards a route, 8 yards per target, 12 yards per touch, with a 61% catch rate. His role should increase this year, but I'm unsure exactly how much. He did have a shoulder injury that he played through most of last season, and he's reportedly had surgery on it, and it shouldn't be an issue moving forward. The Bears also added Cordero Patterson, who is 28 and more of a running back than a wide receiver at this point in his career. He averaged 35 targets, 26 receptions, 278 yards, and 2 touchdowns as a receiver in 2018, with 12 yards per route, 9 yards per target, and a 75% catch rate. He also added 42 carries for 228 yards and a touchdown on the ground for the Pats last season. He's more of a gadget player and will probably be used almost similar to how Tariq Cohen is, to be honest, but he's more depth than an impact player. Javon Wims is in his second year and is also from Georgia, but came out as an undrafted free agent last year. He showed good hands in the preseason, but didn't get very much play once the game started, for real. And fantasy favorite Emmanuel Hall was an undrafted free agent that landed with Chicago as well. He's a burner and pretty good route runner with good hands, but he definitely needs to get more physical and block if he wants to stick around the league. At tight end, the Bears have Trey Burton, who is 28 and arrived in Chicago before the start of last year via undrafted free agency from the Eagles. He was a fantasy hype bust for the most part last year with 76 targets, 54 catches, 569 yards, and 6 touchdowns. It wasn't horrible, but it was also a very down year for tight ends. He really did not look very good on film. He had 11 yards per route, 8 yards per target, 10 yards per touch, and a 71% catch rate. His usage shouldn't change. He's a good player, but nothing special. Adam Shaheen is 25 and was a third-round pick 2 years ago. He lasted 6 games into 2018 before being put on injured reserve for a foot and ankle injury. He's looking like a bust/reach as far as third-round picks go, but tight ends do take a while to develop. He does have a good frame, decent athleticism, and good hands, so he could still put it together. But so far in his career, he only has 20 targets for 17 catches, 175 yards, 4 touchdowns, but a very good 85% catch rate. The Bears' leading pass-catching running back is Tariq Cohen, who is 24. He had the third most targets on the team last year with 91 which is 5.7 per game, 71 receptions, 725 yards, and 5 touchdowns. These numbers led to 10 yards per route, 8 yards per target, and a 78% catch rate. Some of you may be wondering why I don't include the yards per touch for running backs, but that's because they typically get so many carries that the yards per touch isn't really indicative of their pass game usage. Tariq the Freak played the Tyreek Hill role in this offense, but he's more gadgety and a running back than a deep threat and outside receiver like Tyreek Hill is, or was, yet to be seen. At 5'6", 180 pounds, I don't expect his role to change too much this season. I just don't think they're willing to risk his injury, but I do think he could catch some more balls if Trubisky develops. The Bears also acquired Mike Davis, who's 26, who was on the Seahawks last year, and with that team he saw 42 targets and 34 catches for 214 yards and 1 touchdown. That was 6 yards per route, 5 yards per target, and an 81% catch rate. He's a capable catcher of the ball, but he's not Tariq Cohen. He's more of a backup pass catcher and early down runner, but I do think he's going to hold off David Montgomery for at least a little while this season. David Montgomery is 22 and was the 73rd pick in the 3rd round of the NFL draft for the Bears out of Iowa State. Pre-draft, so my potential immediate impact rankings, Montgomery was in my 2nd tier of running back, and I do think he has some learning to do before he overtakes Mike Davis as the lead back. Draft capital says otherwise, the community says otherwise, but I think it's going to take him a little bit of time unless he's a very quick learner. David Montgomery consistently hands catches, has elite contact balance, runs good but not great routes, is pretty slow to the hole, has suspect vision, but it was very difficult to evaluate with the horrible line play he had to deal with most of the time. He's decent but not great in pass protection, and part of that is due to lateral agility and footwork concerns. He wastes too much movement in the backfield, gets hung up too long on rerouters. I'll just pause for a second as some might not know what a rerouter is. That is a defender whose entire purpose is only to ruin your timing on your route by contacting you and keeping you there as long as possible. I do question his overall football IQ, especially in pass protection. I'm not sold on his burst, agility, or vision, and to me that's a bad combo as an NFL running back. His style is also going to lead to taking a lot of hits in the NFL. He could definitely be good with time, and they could just say, throw him out there on the field and let him learn on the fly, but he's got a lot of holes in his game as far as technical skill at playing running back, especially in pass protection, and Nagy doesn't seem like the type of person to risk that. The Bears quarterback is Mitchell Trubisky, who will be 25 this year. He was the 2nd overall pick and is entering his 3rd year. He threw 3,223 yards and 24 touchdowns in 14 games last year, leading to a 95 passer rating. He should continue to develop. He's a strong-armed and mobile but inaccurate at times quarterback, and he still fails to diagnose complex blitzes and coverages. I don't know if it's their offensive system or Trubisky's style, but he spreads the ball around to a lot of receivers every game. The Bears' passing offense was 21st in yards per game, behind both Detroit and Denver. They were 9th in points per game, which to me indicates that they had a great defense that gave them shorter drives, and that they have a good offensive mind that uses the scheme and play calling to manipulate the defense for points, right? That's kind of the goal of an offensive coordinator. The Bears were also 24th in pass attempts per game, so definitely not a high volume passing attack. I do like Trubisky, especially in fantasy because of his running, and I expect growth, but I'm not sure how quickly that will be. I don't think it's going to be a Patrick Mahomes sitting on the bench to leading the NFL in touchdowns, but over time, I do think he will improve his overall game. His offensive line was 7th in pass protection, 28th in yards created for the running back, 18th in power, and bottom 10 in all other run metrics. They didn't draft any O-linemen, but they did add 5 undrafted free agents. It's not likely to change much. So my theory about what happened in the draft for the Bears is they traded away Jordan Howard and needed to draft a running back, but they were actually going to go offensive line, but too many of their targets got taken by the 3rd round. This is complete conjecture, literally no logic to back it up other than my instinct, but I think they said, well, instead of bolstering the offensive line because we don't like these prospects here, let's get a running back that can break tackles by himself. And Montgomery can. He's got great contact balance. But people drafting him very high in fantasy drafts, in dynasty rookie drafts that is, both actually, might want to look at how poor the Bears were in run metrics last season. The offense as a whole was 16th in yards per drive, 11th in points per drive, 6th in time of possession per drive, and the 6th most run-heavy team at 47.8% of plays being runs. I don't see the run percentage changing all too much with their insanely good defense. Their defense was 3rd in yards per game last year, 1st in points per game, 1st in rushing yards per game, and 7th in passing yards per game with a 12-4 record. They did add Buster Skrine, a cornerback who was on the Jets and is slightly above replacement level, and they drafted 6th and 7th round cornerbacks, but they lost Bryce Callahan, who was a above average to great slot corner, to the Broncos. They signed 9 undrafted free agents. The defense should be near the top again, but I could definitely see them being worse against the pass. The Bears head coach is Matt Nagy, who's entering his 2nd year and used to be the offensive coordinator of the Chiefs and is an Andy Reid disciple. He looks like a smart coach to me. Hopefully he can further Trubisky's development after a year in the offensive system. I actually like Nagy more than I think I'm liking some of the moves by Ryan Pace. But with a lot of these NFL front offices, it is hard to tell who's actually making the decision. But I'd have to say Nagy did the most logical things he could to ensure the team won. He recognized how good the defense was. He knew Trubisky wasn't ready to lead an air raid passing attack. And he just made the other team have to play against their defense with as much rest as possible every game. It led them to a 12-4 record. So he's definitely got my vote of, at the least, a good coach. Possibly great. We'll see in a few years. Now, let's talk about Riley Ridley, the player. I already went over him in the Tier 1 episode breakdown, but we'll do it again in case you missed it, but just a little quicker. He's barely over 6'1", 199 pounds, massive 10.25-inch hands, and a 78.25-inch wingspan. He's coming out of Georgia at 22.82 years old, had the 10th lowest weight divided by height, 12th best span divided by height, and 4th best hand size divided by height of the receivers I scouted. At the combine, he ran a 4.58 40, which was underwhelming, a far below average 30.5-inch vert, a slightly above average 124-inch broad, put up 13 reps on the bench, had a 7.223 cone, and a slightly concerning 4.28-yard shuttle. The things that Ridley showed he was good at on film were that he's tough, he will block, great stop and start ability, he can find the soft spots in the zone, is aware of where the first down marker is, has high football IQ, has a better burst than the combine shows, he competes every single snap. My favorite thing about him is that he can combine multiple techniques without hesitation throughout the duration of the play. Most college wide receivers cannot do that. Most college wide receivers don't even know the number of techniques that he knows, let alone put them together with perfect timing. He's a hands catcher. He can win the release with both finesse and physicality, looks more athletic on film than the combine, is a great route runner, has great body control. He's a football player, and if you heard the Tier 1 breakdown, I don't call very many wide receivers football players. He shows great sideline awareness, and he can adjust to poorly thrown footballs. The bad things about Riley Ridley are his combine. He does show some drops on film. He can get pushed around by the corner at times with physicality, and he's just not a physical, huge, imposing receiver. He did drop in the draft to the 4th round, which also is a negative indicator for future success. Not a death sentence, but it is lower than where you'd like to see him go in the draft. So where does the analysis of the landing spot and the player himself combine to let me know where to draft him in a rookie draft? Well, it was a bad landing spot for first-year production because he has a lot of competition for targets. The quarterback is promising but uncertain, and he's on a run-heavy team. The offense also spreads the ball around. They don't target one receiver this much and another receiver this much. It's all kind of spread out equally, or at least it was last year. That could always change, but you have to go off what you saw most recently and modify it with logical future gut feelings. With that being said, I do love the player. I believe he will find a role on the team eventually. I'm not quite sure what that is yet, but I don't see heavy target volume within their system due to the number of capable pass catchers they've already got there and what seems to be their offensive philosophy of spread the ball around, keep everyone fresh, which is good for a team, and I admire the strategy, but it's not optimal for fantasy football. I think he'll be a better player for the Bears than he will be your fantasy team, and with the depth chart in front of him, I could not take him before the 3rd round. Even then, it would really depend on who's on the board before I could jump on Ridley. I'll say it again. I would rather have many of the tight ends in this class than Ridley. Nothing against Ridley. I just really like a lot of the tight ends in this class. And I'd almost bet you money that Ridley's going before Kahale in every draft. I would be doing the opposite for sure. I do think Ridley will fall in drafts because of the combine and the low draft capital, and he is a long-term investment. Even though I was high on him pre-draft, that depth chart and situation makes me think it's going to take a while for him to have his situation change enough to see enough targets to be fantasy relevant. But I do think he will pay off at some point. I don't know when, but I like the player on film too much. It just really depends on where you get him in your drafts. Back end of the 3rd, and Kahale's off the board, and Sternberger, then I'd take him. Probably wouldn't take him over either of those 2 tight ends and a few other running backs. On Monday's episode, we're going to be going over more news, if there is any. I'll pretty much be doing the news almost daily, but it does depend on what happens and what I find to be fantasy relevant or just conjecture. I don't really like to comment on conjecture too much because it's just a waste of time. Might as well wait for the situation to play itself out. I'm also going to be really explaining in detail what the paid content is as it sits, each piece of it, and how it can help move you through the 4 decision-making processes we talked about the other day: random choice, analytic, heuristic, and expertise. We'll talk about how the paid content is designed for you to adapt to the landscape of the league quicker than your teammates in your Dynasty league and allow you to make good trades based off of that information. But anyways, we'll get more into that on Monday. I do want to say thanks to Kyler, who is the newest Patreon member. I emailed back and forth with him today. It was a pretty fun little convo. So thanks, Kyler, for the feedback. Let me know how it sounds today. And for all the rest of you, the songs of the day, the happy song is I Want to Break Free by Queen. The football song is still DRE by Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg. I hope he brings his green hat. Again, those links will be in the episode description. Thanks to everybody listening. Thanks to the new Patreon members. Thanks for the feedback that I've received and will help me improve this show going forward. You've been listening to Dynasty 365. Have a great weekend. And remember, the film will set you free.
So much trouble, it's not my fault, all this I also lose my friends, I lost my baby. That is smoking crack, only today want to change. He wanted us on a cougar to try, well, I do feel I'd skill the real, take your life in a second. The devil drinks coffee in my kitchen, I mentioned it in every song. I just wanted to go away. You decide to stay in the well. I want to be forgiven, I don't like to skip for money. Sorry I was scared, you're not the way it feels. Like to sleep waiting for someone to come in and kill you. The final thing is that now I'm not afraid of anything. Go they gonna kill anyone that feels so powerful. They jump at you, I read your skin up, everything is confusing. You will be good, but you will be